We've talked about universal forces and innate forces. And we've noticed that the laws of the universe that run universal forces also run those special universal forces which we call innate forces, meaning those which are adapted for use within the body. Now we've talked only so far about electrical force or electrical energy. Now we have to direct ourselves to other universal force, kinetic force, movement. We talked about the bones of the spine becoming distorted from their normal position in such a way that they change nerve pathways, that they alter the environment of a nerve. Now that every chiropractor calls vertebral subluxation. Chiropractors agree on vertebral subluxation, they don't always agree on adjustment. Adjustment, we have said, occurs when the innate intelligence replaces a vertebra to its proper position. But let's talk about vertebral subluxation a little bit. How does it happen? Vertebral subluxation is a condition in which a vertebra has lost its proper relationship with the vertebra above or the vertebra below or both. Less than a dislocation, but nevertheless enough to occlude an opening, make it a little smaller, impinging a nerve. That doesn't mean pinching, it means encroaching upon the environment of a nerve, thereby altering the structure, which results in altering the function and changes the transmission of mental impulses from the brain to the tissue cells. And changing them means making them imperfect, simply because if you change anything that is perfect, the only thing you can do is make it imperfect. You cannot improve upon nature. Now, how do you know you can't improve upon nature? Because we start out with our chiropractic a priori reasoning that there is a universal intelligence. And unless we think that our intelligence is greater than universal intelligence, we have to assume that it has perfection we don't understand, and we trust it to know how to run a human body. It's incredible to me that we trust universal intelligence to create a baby, to build a baby, and the moment the baby's born, we want some educated mind to look at it and see if it's doing all right. Have you noticed that mothers and doctors weigh the baby? Why? What is it supposed to weigh? I mean, think about it. What in the hell is the point of weighing the baby if you don't know what it's supposed to weigh? Well, you can compare them with somebody else's baby, and you can show off a little more. Okay, let's do all of that, but we're also going to assume 100% that any change in nature's structure is an imperfection. A vertebral subluxation interfering with the environment of a nerve makes the body less than it could have been, less than it was before. What causes this vertebral subluxation? Well, let's pause for a moment and see what prevents it. What keeps the vertebrae in their proper place? Obviously, muscles, attached, in balance, agonists and antagonists pulling in opposite directions, attached in many points on all vertebrae, holding them in place. Those muscles pulling evenly in a state of tone maintain the body in an upright position, maintain the vertebrae in their proper relationships until we wish to bend or twist or turn, at which time an agonist will relax and the antagonist contract. When we wish to change positions, the reverse should take place. Sometimes, however, vertebrae don't go back to the position they should. And I think we have to examine some of the reasons that vertebrae don't go back to their normal positions. We have to study the laws of momentum and inertia. Momentum. Bodies in motion tend to remain in motion until acted upon by a counter force. Inertia. Bodies at rest tend to remain at rest until acted upon by another force. The vertebrae are held in a state not of inertia, but dynamic tension. Increase or decrease in the tension is what allows us freedom of movement. I suppose universal intelligence or the innate intelligence could have made this body absolutely proof against vertebral subluxation. Could have created it in such a way that it couldn't subluxate. How? By making the spine rigid. One piece of bone instead of 24 movable segments. But for its own reasons, the innate intelligence decided to have us mobile, to give us the ability to move. To do that, this pipe of bone which protects the spinal cord is cut up into 24 movable segments called vertebrae. Each one perfectly designed for its own function. Each one held in place and moved from place to place by muscles, controlled by nerves. But forces are constantly acting upon the body. Some force is so violent that the body can't defend against them. And I'm going to start off with an extreme example to illustrate a point, and then we can look at other examples. Let's take somebody falling down a flight of stairs. Introducing incredible forces into their spine. Forces perhaps so strong that they will overcome the adaptative forces, the defensive forces of the body's muscles, and knock one of those vertebrae out of place. Now that kind of a fall obviously could break a bone. Remember, these universal forces, unadapted, are destructive toward living things as well as non-living things. It is the job of the innate intelligence to take universal forces, dangerous, damaging, unadapted universal forces, and first of all, adapt some of them into its own use. And second, if it can't do that, at least to ward off as much as it can. But sometimes the forces brought to bear are so great that they overcome innate resistance, and one of the results of that can be vertebral subluxation. One could be broken bone. When an external invasive force, a universally invasive force, enters the body, the innate intelligence immediately sets up an innate resistive force. These two forces meet and result in a concussion of forces. If it is a controlled concussion, controlled by the innate intelligence, it probably will not result in vertebral subluxation. If it is totally uncontrolled, it may result in fractures or death. If it is partly controlled, and that's what happens to most of them, it will result in vertebral subluxation. Now, over a period of time, most of the time, the innate intelligence is able to use other forces and correct the subluxation. Examples of forces that the innate intelligence will use: maybe a fall down the other flight of stairs. Maybe by the sheerest luck, 10 million to 1 chance, just the right force will be put into the spine to correct the prior subluxation. This is not a technique recommended, however. It is the job of the innate intelligence to correct vertebral subluxations. And it's been doing that very successfully for tens of thousands of years. Unfortunately, it can't always get all of them. Maybe the innate intelligence doesn't have available to it the right force that it can adapt into an adjustment. Sometimes when there's a subluxation there, a person will just turn around, and maybe they'll feel something happen, or maybe they won't. But with that turning motion, with the throwing of a bowling ball or the swinging of a golf club, the very same action that could cause a vertebral subluxation could be adapted by the body into constructive use and correct the subluxation. The innate intelligence corrects subluxations and has been correcting them long before there were chiropractors. Unfortunately, it can't do it 100% of the time. And so some people just had to live with their vertebral subluxations as best one can live with a vertebral subluxation. They led their partial life, did the best they could. And very often these vertebral subluxations don't have any manifestations that can be measured from the outside. So people didn't even know they had them. And the innate intelligence for thousands of years has been correcting subluxations. And what it uses to correct them is the body's own spinal muscles. Now, in 1895, using his educated mind and things he'd picked up here and there, D.D. Palmer got the idea that if instead of putting a wild universal force into a human body, he could specifically direct his force into an area where he believed the subluxation was, in a direction and in a manner and using principles of leverage that he educatedly believed would help the body to adapt that force into an adjustment, then the body could do the job that it could not do without his special force. And he tried that, and bingo, it worked, and chiropractic was born. Chiropractic consists of introducing into the body an external invasive force, not raw and untamed, but refined through the hands and the mind of the chiropractor, directed to the specific area with a specific line of drive where we believe the innate intelligence could best use it, and this really is an educated guess on the part of the chiropractor. That's what all the education of chiropractic is about, to understand the individuality of that body and to apply minds and hand and concentration to introduce the least amount of force that, properly applied, can be converted by the body into an adjustment. That is chiropractic perfection. B.J. Palmer, in talking about this, said sometimes you can hit him in the ass with a shovel and kick him down a flight of stairs and 70% of them will get well. I don't think he ever measured the percentage. That was a guess. But the point is, that's not the technique of choice. For choice, what we want to do is try and analyze the spine using our hands, our instruments, whatever else, to determine where we believe a force could most effectively be used and adapted and made into an adjustment. And that's what chiropractic is all about. Now, obviously, there are many, many different techniques for introducing forces into the spine. Every one of them is valid chiropractic if its purpose and its intent is to introduce a force for the body to use to adjust a vertebral subluxation. Anything other than that is outside the realm of chiropractic. Now, it is not my purpose to judge whether anything else is good or bad or should be done by chiropractors. I'm not going to make those judgments. I'm just going to state what chiropractic is and what it is not. It is not anything but the analysis of the vertebrae and of the muscles around those vertebrae in order to determine the location of vertebral subluxation and to design a specific force best calculated to be used at its minimum for the effective use of the body in correcting the vertebral subluxation. Now, within that realm, for many different methods, it seems that almost everybody who had something that was good for him or her wanted to share it with everybody else and tell them that it was better than their method. And there are a lot of silly, bitter arguments within the chiropractic profession about whose technique is best. I rather suspect that there is less to be said, or there should be less said, about good and bad techniques than about good and bad technicians. I rather suspect that if you, a good chiropractor, were not permitted to use your technique, but if you're a good technician, you could adapt yourself to some other technique and do equally well. Let's talk for a little bit about the qualities of being a good chiropractor. I think the number one concern is a total commitment not to the care of the patient, but to the serving of this principle. If you commit yourself to the care of the patient, you may be called upon to do many things that are not chiropractic. Your patients are not just spines. There is a whole person. And if you attempt to serve the whole person, you'll have no time for chiropractic. Your commitment should be to the principle of chiropractic. You devote yourself, you dedicate yourself to using your body to refine universal forces for your patients so that those patients can use them to achieve an adjustment and become subluxation free. I think that, for me, would be the first quality of a chiropractor. The second quality, beyond that dedication, would be sensitivity. The willingness to sublimate one's own personality and tune totally, educatedly now, into the body of the patient. To respect the individuality which makes every human being different from every other. There is no patient exactly like the one who's on the table right now. And the one who's on the table right now is different from the time he or she was on the table yesterday. We must totally concentrate and tune ourselves in to an understanding of that body and the state of that body at this moment. using whatever chiropractic means we use to determine where is the subluxation that we are going to address, and what points of leverage can we use in which direction to gain maximum mechanical advantage so that we can reduce force to an absolute minimum. And that for me represents best technique in chiropractic. Utilizing universal forces, refining them through us so that the body will accept them, convert them into innate forces, and make simple adjustments. Given unlimited force, it's possible to achieve adjustment with the worst technique in the world. The sloppiest technique in the world can get an adjustment if enough force is used. But obviously, using enough force can be very undesirable. Our intent is to reduce the force to a minimum. You can only do that when things are done accurately, particularly with regard to line of drive. The other part of sensitivity, tuning into the person, is to understand that subtle instant when the person is ready to receive and convert your force into an innate force. That subtle instant, sometimes they'll only give you a split second, and you've got to be so tuned into them that at that instant you can release that tiny little bit of force that's enough to do the job, and a split second later you take 10 times as much force to do it. We've all had experience, we've all been chiropractic students, and we've all had other students working on us. Stiff and nervous and rigid and insensitive to anything except the fact that the instructor's watching. And this nervous tension transmits through nervous hands, and we've been victimized by having more force put in than necessary, and worse than that, having had force put in at the wrong moment. There comes a subtle moment of acceptance. See, chiropractic is not something you do to somebody. And I wish I could get every chiropractor to understand this. It's not something you do on somebody else's back. It is two human beings together sharing a partnership in which one gives the force and one receives the force. And it has to be done as a partnership in which the person receiving is open and receiving. If they're resisting at that moment, you've got two people clashing together. You're multiplying the force by 2 or 4 or 24. And it all has to do with timing. When you're invited in, it's so easy and so gentle. No resistance, no violent concussion. If your timing is off, if that person's pushing back when you're pushing in, that's when you get technique trauma. So the other characteristic that we are stressing is sensitivity and a willingness to let a person leave your office still with the vertebral subluxation if this is not the day for them to accept your force. If they won't let you put it in, I for one am not going to use force to overcome fear, because using force to overcome fear causes what? More fear. Now you've justified their fears. The self-fulfilling prophecy. I know you're going to hurt me. Huh? Now you do it, you know you're going to hurt them. And the next time, are they going to relax more or less? The interesting thing is, and I found this out with children, kids are very often scared. They go into a chiropractor's office for the first time, and there's this monster machine, the table. There are still some chiropractors wearing medical clinic jackets or having medical instruments lying around, stethoscopes and things like that. Don't you think the kids have a memory bank? The last time they saw that kind of equipment, somebody stuck needles into them. And worse than that, mother lied to them and said, the nice doctor won't hurt you. Now the kid comes to the chiropractor for the first time and says, mother says, come on, be brave. The nice doctor won't hurt you. And that rings the bells and triggers the memories. That little kid gets on the table terrified. And there's no way I'm going to start putting forces into a spine to bring about adjustments on that child on that day. As well as having a good pair of hands, chiropractor needs good common sense. Let's spend a little time in going through the motions. Let's pretend we're doing our technique and earning the child's trust. And we don't put any forces in there. And the next time they'll come back with a little less fear. Well, it didn't really hurt last time. I bet he's going to hurt me this time. They're still tight. And you do it again with no force, and no force, and no force. And then when they finally relax, now you don't punish them by jumping on them with both feet. When they finally relax, you'll find that the no force you were using all along is really more than enough force when they're totally relaxed. And that applies not only to little kids, it applies to full-grown 240-pound ditch diggers. It applies to everybody. Not everybody is ready to receive a chiropractic thrust when they lie down on a chiropractic table. And one of our jobs is to recognize this with subtlety. Maybe take a little more time. Maybe go through the motions today and put in a little more, or put in the force in a little more time, 2 or 3 more days rather than just now. One of the things we have to do in that regard is to overcome this insistence by the patients that you render medical first aid. Unfortunately, when patients go to chiropractors, what they want is to feel better. Now, that's not the job of the chiropractor at all. It is the job of the chiropractor to allow the innate intelligence to make an adjustment. The natural result of that over a period of time for most people is that they will feel better. Some will feel better instantly. Some will feel better in 10 visits or 15 visits. Some may never feel better, and some will feel worse and should. You see, a vertebral subluxation, we must remember, not only interferes with motor nerves and trophic nerves, it also interferes with sensory nerve. A sensory nerve that is unable to transmit an impulse is feeding up to the brain, no pain, no pain, no pain, even when there is tissue damage. The nerve itself is so damaged it can't transmit the impulse of pain. Now you come along and through your chiropractic technique, an adjustment occurs. The nerve channel now is free to carry what? An impulse of pain. And the person says, boy, I don't know what you did to me. You made it worse. Before I only had pain in my neck. Now the arm hurts. What you really have to communicate to them is they had arm pain all along. They just couldn't feel it because the nerves were dead. Now, it's a hell of a thing for you to communicate with no background. But it's fact. Maybe we should be spending a lot more time teaching our patients that the job of a chiropractor is not to treat or cure their pain or make them feel better. Maybe we should teach them a little chiropractic. Maybe we should teach them that it's our job merely to help the body to open the nerve channels. And as a result of that, the body will function better. Now, most of the time, functioning better means they will feel better, but not necessarily all of the time. And certainly, you and I can't set the timetable for when that's supposed to happen. Our job is not to make the pains go away. You know, every chiropractor really should know this, and yet most chiropractors practice as though they never heard of it. We fall into the trap of trying to please the patient. It is not our job to please the patient. Interestingly, to please the patient in Greek is placebo. That's what placebo means, to please. And we're putting ourselves in the same trap as the medical doctor. Chiropractic has so much more to offer. I don't like to see chiropractors reduce themselves to nothing more than a slip disc jockey. It is true that vertebral subluxation frequently causes pain in the back. But a great deal of the time vertebral subluxation produces no pain at all. It may take 10, 15, or 20 years before the organ served by that nerve shows physical signs of disease. Do you remember when Betty Ford used to go for her cancer checkups of breast cancer every 6 months, and she would advertise the importance of self-examination and medical examination, and every 6 months she'd be back on television telling us how important it is to get our checkup, and then one time they examined her and they found she had breast cancer. But they got it early because she went every 6 months. How early do you think they got it? Read your Boyd's textbook of pathology. Cancer cells, remember, are microscopic. They can't be seen with the naked eye. According to Boyd's textbook of pathology, it takes anywhere from 7 to 15 years for the first cancer cell to develop into a pea-sized lump, which can be found on self-examination or medical examination. 7 to 15 years when people are giving examinations, diagnostic workups, and saying, clean bill of health, everything is all right. Now, when do you think the subluxations should be eliminated? After the cancer shows up? It's idiotic to suspect or suggest that chiropractors would treat cancer. But it's even more idiotic for cancer patients to walk around with vertebral subluxation saying, I feel fine so far. You know, it's like the fellow falls out of the top story window of the Empire State Building. And as he passes every window on the way down, he says, well, I feel fine so far. Sure. When you hit the bottom, that sudden stop is what bothers you. Huh? Why don't chiropractors stop pandering to the stupidity of patients who've been raised in the inductive medical world to believe that if they have no symptoms, everything is all right? And this happens constantly. Patients will walk into the chiropractor's office and the first words out of the chiropractor's mouth are, how do you feel today? What you're saying is to reinforce their belief that they should come to a chiropractor when they hurt, which means stopping coming when they don't hurt. The fact is, vertebral subluxation has no signs, no symptoms, the vast majority of the time. Yes, sometimes it'll cause a backache or pain in the neck or an asthmatic attack. But very often, if there are symptoms at all, they're not symptoms that most people would associate with the spine or chiropractic. And the vast majority of the time, there are no symptoms at all. Why don't we educate our patients to the fact that it is our job to check the spine to see if there are vertebral subluxations? And if there are, to introduce a directed universal force for the body to adapt into an adjustment. I believe that nobody in his right mind would intelligently walk around with vertebral subluxation if they knew what it was. I think chiropractic has done the worst public education job of any profession I have ever heard of. There is not a single human being alive that doesn't need chiropractic care. I don't care if they die of cancer, if they have no disease at all. You certainly don't need vertebral subluxation on top of what else is wrong. And yet there are thousands of people now coming to you to get well and leaving their families home to get sick. Why? If a mother comes to you to get well and leaves her child home, it must mean one of two things. Either she's trying to kill the child, or she doesn't know what vertebral subluxation is doing. And I can't believe the former. And if it is the latter, if she doesn't know what vertebral subluxation is doing, whose fault is that? She walks into your office knowing nothing about chiropractic and apparently walks out knowing just as much. Nothing. We are not communicating. We're sitting talking at the people and not getting across. Now maybe it's time for us to stop talking and give them a chance to talk. Let's digress for a moment and talk about something that is very dear to my heart, a subject called active listening. To listen to what other people are saying. I have an idea that half the arguments in the world wouldn't happen if one person of the two would just shut up and just listen for a moment to what the other one... You know what's happening? They're not listening to each other. One is talking and the other one's waiting for a gap in the conversation and getting his argument ready. Right? And as soon as there's a gap, he jumps in with his argument, neither one listening to the other. And this is what's happening with you talking with your patients. They're getting their yeah buts ready. I mean, they know it's going to cost money, right? So you're sitting explaining and they're getting all their yeah buts ready. Maybe they're not listening to you at all. Are you telling your patients about chiropractic? Oh yes, I give them the whole story. You've given me a little memorized pitch and nothing's being communicated because they're not hearing it. Our trouble is we talk about it so much that it's become mechanical to us. Why don't we instead share a little bit of our chiropractic understanding and then give them the opportunity to say it back to us in their own words? Then we'll know if they understand it or not. Try this with your kids. Try this the next time you get in an argument with somebody. Try it with your boss. Try it with your employers and employees. Say, well, are you saying that, and they'll say, no, I didn't mean that at all. What I mean is, and they'll tell you what they mean. Or you explain back and forth what you mean. When you both understand what you're talking about, you might just find you're talking about the same thing. You didn't disagree at all. Chiropractors ask all the wrong questions when they talk to patients. They ask stupid questions like, do you understand? What the hell do you think the patient is going to say? No? Do you understand? Yeah, of course I understand what I think you said. They think they understand. And even if they didn't understand, chances are, you get some lawyer up there and you're explaining to him about vertebral subluxation, and you say, do you understand? Well, of course I do. What do you think, I'm stupid? I'm a lawyer. Huh? People don't like to admit they don't understand. Hey, listen, let's test you out. You ever do this? People give you directions with a complete double talk, and you say, okay, thank you, and walk on? Yeah? You're the smart ones. You're the chiropractors, and you do it. Other people do it to you. Let's start to communicate with people. Let's ask them what they understand chiropractic to be. I want to ask specific questions. I'm going to hold up a spine, a model fiberglass spine with the nerves in there, and make a subluxation and ask them, what do you think that would do to the organs at the other end of that nerve? If they can't explain that, there's no point in going on anymore. And if they can explain it and they know what it's doing, now I've got a couple more questions. Would you like your child that you're not bringing in to have one of those? Huh? Next question is, do you know if your child has one or not? Huh? Would you like to find out? Huh? When? Get the people to talk. We're talking at people instead of communicating with them. You know, chiropractic is so easy to promote. When I first heard chiropractic, I went for this thing so hook, line, and sinker. That night, I called my partner in Europe, and I said, Paul, get your ass back here. You've just inherited a business. I'm going to school to be a chiropractor. That's the very first night that I heard the word chiropractor, because somebody explained it to me in a way that I understood. When you heard about chiropractic, you bought it hook, line, and sinker. You're not stupid. Why did you buy it? Because it made sense to you. It'll make sense to all those people out there, too, if somebody will only explain it to them. They're not stupid. They just don't know that chiropractic is not just a patching up of backaches, because nobody told them. They come into you with their sore leg and their sciatica, and instead of you telling them about chiropractic, you explain how the spine caused the sciatica. And then you wonder why they don't bring their kids in. The kids don't have sciatica. Their wife's at home with anemia. They don't bring her in. They know there's no nerve supply to the anemes. And this is what we're doing. Let's sit the patients down and explain to them all the things we've talked about during these last few hours together. Let's explain the job of chiropractic. That we don't get sick people well, and we don't give adjustments. Our job is to merely help the body to adapt untamed universal forces into adapted innate forces. And we do that by refining and adapting those forces through our own minds and our own hands. As far as technique is concerned, I think one of the most stupid arguments in all of chiropractic is the argument about technique. My technique's better than your technique. If you just use common sense principles of physics and leverage and think about it, the best technique for you is the one which will most successfully accomplish an adjustment with the least amount of force being used. You don't even need a name or a label for it. It's amazing how much common sense will help to select what is correct and what is appropriate. Let's talk next, as chiropractors, and this is a vital thing, about how do you find the subluxation. And I've seen all kinds of things used. A great number of things which didn't make a great deal of sense to me. And I'll tell you something, anything that doesn't make sense to me, I don't use. That doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. It just means it didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand it, or I found some shortcoming in it. And there were a lot of things that I was taught that I found shortcomings with. In fact, it came down to a realization that there was only one determining factor that I could really depend upon. There's only one method that made sense enough to me that I was willing to stake my professional reputation and the life of my patients on. And that was the realization that first, the innate intelligence makes adjustments without chiropractors. Now, can't always do it, unfortunately. Sometimes forces are not available. But the innate intelligence doesn't quit trying. There is an innate awareness of every innate need. This body grows new parts. This body repairs torn tissue. It knows what it needs. It heals itself. It does everything necessary to maintain itself in life. Do you think it's going to leave vertebral subluxation there and just ignore it? Shrug its shoulders? Obviously, the innate intelligence is using its muscles constantly to try and bring about adjustments. In order for the innate intelligence to make adjustments, what does it have to use? Its own muscles. That's the only thing that moves bones. When you put a force into the patient's body, it's not your force that moves the bone. If it were, you'd be pretty dangerous because you don't know where the bone belongs. Your force must be adapted by the body's muscles. It's the innate intelligence using those muscles correctly, using your force, but converting it, that makes the adjustment. And the innate intelligence is constantly trying to correct any subluxations by using its muscles. Do you realize if you could train your fingers to feel those muscle fibers, to feel what the body is trying to do, you would have access to the best source of information about subluxation? This innate intelligence, remember please, when you misuse the term innate, that innate's last name is intelligence. And it is innate intelligence that will intelligently use the right muscles to correct subluxation. If a vertebra feels to be and x-rays to be a half an inch right of the median line, who cares? We don't know where the vertebra belongs, but the innate intelligence does. If it's a half an inch right of the median line and they're still breathing, and the innate intelligence is trying to pull it more to the right of the median line, that's where it belongs. Let's start trusting the innate intelligence rather than the mechanical lines we can draw on x-rays. The spine is not meant to be straight. It is meant to be where that innate intelligence wants it. And until you know where that innate intelligence wants it, you have no right to move it. It is not your job to move it toward the middle. Where does the innate intelligence want it? Well, the only way you'll find the answer to that is feel the muscles and see where the innate intelligence is trying to pull it. There is a definite difference between a spastic muscle, a flaccid muscle, and a working muscle. Until you can determine that difference, you cannot intelligently determine where to put in your force. So step number one is going to be to sensitize your fingers and experience enough muscles of different kinds to know the difference. You say, well, how can you tell? What is the difference, Reggie, between a working muscle and a spastic muscle? I can no more explain that in words than I can explain in words the difference between the taste of milk chocolate and dark chocolate. There is a difference, and you know it if you've ever tasted the two. You describe the difference to me in words. There are no words to describe taste. There are no words to describe feeling. But if I found a spastic muscle and I found a working muscle and I put your fingers on both, you could see the difference. Now, you may not pick it up the first time. You don't get to be a wine taster the first time you taste wine. But after years of dedicated practice and supervision, you can get to the point where you can tell the vintage, the vineyard, the country of origin, the chateau in which it was bottled. You can even tell the nature of the casks in which it was stored, not just the difference between red and white. But that takes a lot of years of dedicated practice. Unfortunately, chiropractors still in their training spend most of their time, 95% of their time, learning things that are irrelevant to the practice of chiropractic, and have precious little time for learning the most important thing they will ever learn, how to use their fingers. When chiropractic students go home at night, they pore over the books for hours on end so they can get decent grades in irrelevant subjects and have no time at all for practicing the thing that their patients' lives depend upon: their sensitivity and their ability to feel the difference between a muscle that is spastic, one that is flaccid, and one that is working to correct the vertebral subluxation. We must dedicate ourselves. Those of us in practice don't have time to go back to school. We must dedicate ourselves first to sensitizing our fingers, and second, to attuning our minds. Total concentration is what it takes to attune your mind to muscles and determine the difference. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy to be a chiropractor. It does take dedication. It does take concentration. It takes honing your skills. And yet, damn it, if they can train themselves to be wine tasters, I can train myself to be a chiropractor. If you lost your eyesight and you had nothing else to depend upon, inside of 3 months you'd be reading Braille. And you'd be reading faster with your fingertips than you're now reading with your eyes. That's how sensitive your fingers can become if you dedicate yourself to them. And as chiropractors, we must dedicate ourselves to sensitizing these natural tools. No, you're not tuning into the patient's innate. What you're doing is dedicating yourself to learning a skill. Just as a touch typist learns to touch type without looking at the keys. Seems impossible. How can you hit the right key every time without looking? Well, you do the same thing, don't you? You drive the car and you don't look to see which gear it's going in. You don't look to see where the brake pedal is or the gas pedal. It becomes automatic after a while. And training our fingers to sensitivity is exactly the same thing, determining the difference between those three types of muscles, or among those three different types of muscles, becomes easy if you practice, practice, practice. Remember the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice, son, practice. And that's how you get to be a chiropractor, rather than a mechanic. And that's the only thing that I have found that is a truly valid test of what the innate intelligence wants done with that particular vertebra. I know what you want to do with it. I know what the x-ray experts want to do with it. I know what the machinists want to do with it. What I really need to know is what the innate intelligence wants to do with it. Because once I have that information, I know it is 100% right 100% of the time. There is an innate awareness of every innate need, and the innate intelligence is never wrong. If I can tune in to what the innate intelligence is trying to do, one single fiber pulling a spinous to the right means I can follow that line of drive with my finger on the spinous, or my thumb on the spinous, or my elbow on the spinous for that matter, and just add a force that can be converted into the adjustment. And if I can't reach the spinous, I know enough about anatomy and I felt enough of that patient's bones of the spine that I can apply my force perhaps to the transverse process instead of the spinous, and still get the same general direction of utilization of forces. The idea is to take advantage of the laws of leverage, the laws of physics. Let's get rid of some of these differences in chiropractic between my method is better than your method. You know what's the best method? The one that works for you the greatest percentage of the time on the greatest number of people. The one that is not traumatic and allows people to walk out of your office subluxation free the greatest percentage of the time. And it probably won't have a name on it. It'll be your own variation according to your body shape and size, you utilizing your skills and your forces to the best of your ability. All right, let's change topics for a moment. And I want to talk a little bit about the laws of the universe. We've referred to them. We've talked about the law of leverage and several other things governing matter, energy, force. Let's talk about universal laws, because only by recognizing universal laws can we work comfortably within them. Let's first define what we're talking about by universal law. Science has often referred to the laws of nature. We call them the laws of the universe. In science, as a matter of fact, they're given individual names. Things like the law of gravity, Boyle's law, Newton's law, Avogadro's law. All of these laws are merely observations of the way the universe works. We have established that there is universal intelligence maintaining order and organization, which means things have to be run by law, by inflexible, immutable rules. We're using the word law here slightly differently from the way it's generally used. When you drove here tonight at 65 miles an hour, you were breaking the law. Except that's not really a law, because laws can't be broken. You were breaking a rule, and for that you get a fine. But you cannot break a universal law. And it's good to know what the laws are, because if you try and break them, they break you. Simon Magnus learned that when he tried to break the law of gravity. These so-called laws are merely observations that the universe functions in a structured way. And we should really be very thankful that it does. Just imagine if there were no universal laws. Let's talk for a moment about the law of cause and effect. No such thing. Things were still random, or were at random. You plant apples and you don't know whether the tree that comes up will bear apples or corn or pickles. Now how can you live a life when you don't know what's going to happen? The law of cause and effect says, look, if you plant apples, apples are going to come up, or maybe nothing will come up. But you certainly won't get corn on that tree, and pickles don't grow on trees. We need laws because otherwise we couldn't accomplish anything. It is a law that the innate intelligence adapts universal forces into innate forces and makes adjustments with them. It is a law that the job of innate intelligence is for life to survive. The entire universe is run by laws, and the more we know about them, the more we can control our life. Let's talk a little bit about the law of cause and effect. There is no such thing as an effect without a cause. It's amazing how people sometimes think they have good practices or bad practices, and it's a matter of luck. Well, he was lucky, she was unlucky, or vice versa. That's absolute nonsense. Let's just reduce this luck thing down to a little common sense. Let's say 5 people sitting around playing poker on any given night. You can get lucky, you can pick good cards all night, and you win. Or you can be very unlucky, you always pick up second money, which means you lose your shirt. That can happen over a short period. It can happen one night. But if you go back with the same people night after night after night, and you always get one person who's lucky and one who's always unlucky, what do you think? You think it's luck, or is one a better poker player than the other? You see, at the end of the year, the cards dealt out and the order in which they come are going to average themselves out, or at the end of 5 years they'll average themselves out. The guy who's a constant loser is the guy who's a lousy poker player. And the guy who's a constant winner is the guy who's a good poker player. It's not luck. The guy who builds a good practice, you think that's luck? How about the one who's always groveling around at the bottom of the heap? You think that's luck? People fail to succeed because they want to fail to succeed. It's very comfortable at the bottom of the heap. There's a lot of company around there. And the rarefied atmosphere at the top is kind of scary. It takes tremendous responsibility. First of all, being a chiropractor takes tremendous responsibility. Now, being a backache chiropractor, I guess, has a lot less responsibility than being a total family chiropractor. Certainly being a chiropractor for 10 people a day takes a lot less responsibility than being a chiropractor for 50 people a day or 100 people a day. The more people you see, the more the responsibility. And the more the responsibility, the more scary it is. But the point is, whether your practice is 10 people a day or 50 people a day or 100 people a day depends not upon luck, but upon you. Your practice is the effect. You are the cause. Now, you don't go through life trying to change effects. When you've planted the apples and apples come up, if you decide I didn't really want apples, I wanted corn, go try changing the effect. Go ahead, try changing the apples into corn. You'll never do it. Neither can you go back in time and unplant the apples. You can't wish them into corn. You can't pray them into corn. What you can do is say, you know, I really would like some corn next year. Then plant corn today. The crop that's going to come up by law is what you plant. Not by luck, not by a hope and a prayer, by the law of cause and effect. It's amazing how much time we spend wishing things were different. That's like somebody who's overweight, but I wish I could lose weight. What utter nonsense this is. You know how to lose weight. Do you know what causes overweight? If you don't, you're the only person who doesn't. Well, it's my glands. Sure, it is your salivary glands. I wish I could lose weight. This is nonsense. That's like I wish I had a successful practice. Absolute nonsense. You know what causes weight loss? You know what causes successful practice. The reason people who are overweight stay overweight is they don't want to pay the price for becoming less heavy. The price is discomfort or whatever else. They have to give up something they want. To be a successful chiropractor, you have to give up some of that tennis time, some of that family time, some of that lying in bed time, some of that comfortable time of being the poor person for whom everybody's sympathetic, because everybody hates the guy at the top. Successful one, you're going to attract a lot of hatred. Oh, I don't want that. I don't want the responsibility of taking care of all those people. I don't want those calls on a Sunday. I want to practice just yay high, just enough to keep me out of the gutter. Well, if that's what you want, that's what you'll get. But the point is, when you understand the law of cause and effect, you know that everything you have is your own responsibility. And everything you don't have is your own responsibility. Life is like a cafeteria. You can have any damn thing you please. You can walk along the design. Notice they always put the desserts first in the cafeteria. Clever. You can walk in there and take 4 desserts. Nobody will stop you. Nobody's going to take it off your plate. Hey, when you were a kid, you couldn't do that. When you were a kid, you couldn't run your own life. You had parents to run it for you. Now you can run your own life. You can have anything you want as to go through that line. But when you get to the other end, somebody's there collecting the money. Everything has a price tag. Free time has a price tag. Success has a price tag. Happiness, family time. What we have to do is put things in proportion, say how much do we want of this and how much of that and how much of this do I give up to get that. But it all works by law. It all works by law. Now what you have to think very carefully what you really want out of life, and be damn careful because you just might get it. Now there's a difference between wanting and wishing. Like the person who wishes he could be thin. He wishes the good fairy would come in the middle of the night and he could become thin doing nothing. That's nonsense. The guy who wants to lose weight knows exactly what to do, and if he wants it, he'll pay the price and he'll get it. Same is true in practice. If you want, well, what do you want for yourself? You want more people? You want more money? You want less work? What do you want? Damn it, you can have anything you want. Just know that you must pay the price. This is the law. Now what we've done here is give you the responsibility of your own life. Can't blame it on anybody else anymore. When you were a kid, other people made your decisions for you. Now you make them. You decide. I had a chiropractor who came to me one time. I shared these ideas with chiropractors over the years, and one who'd failed in practice a few times and wasn't happy. I'd give him credit. The guy had guts. He'd go back into, he was an iron worker before he became a chiropractor. Went back to become an iron worker for 9 months in the freezing weather of the winter in New York, and skidding on the ice on the high buildings. Dangerous job, but he made good money. And he'd put together enough money and he'd go back into practice again and fail again. Then he'd go back to work and he'd earn more money, go back into practice and failing. And he kept failing. He kept doing the same thing. Law of cause and effect. If what you do causes you to fail, don't do the same damn thing again. He came to me and said, Reggie, how can I have the kind of practice that you have? And I said, that's easy. The very first thing you've got to do is make this a chiropractic community. Stop building your practice and start building the community. There are tens of thousands of people out there who desperately need chiropractic, and they're not getting it because you won't tell them the truth about chiropractic. What I want you to do is every time a new patient walks into your office, I want you to sit down with the husband and the wife and talk about family and maintenance care and explain about vertebral subluxation and stop talking about pains and get on to real chiropractic. And I said, once each month, you will insist that every patient come back with a non-patient who will listen to you explain chiropractic. You know, I feel this, and I told him the same thing. I do not believe you can get 50 intelligent people into a room and explain chiropractic without at least 40 of them saying, you know something, it makes sense. I do want my kids subluxation free, and I want to be subluxation free. So I said, each month, every new patient who came in that month must bring in a non-patient for you to explain chiropractic to. And he said, oh, Reggie, I couldn't do that. What else could I do? I said, what else you can do, you've been doing all these years. You can bloody well starve. And that's the story. You know the rules for success. You know the rules for non-success. Now you pick what you want. It's that simple. You can have anything you want in this life, but you've got to pay the price. Look at it carefully, make sure you want it, make sure you want it badly enough, and that you're prepared to pay the price. That's the law of cause and effect. It will govern your practice, it will govern your life, it'll govern your relationships with your children, your friends, your colleagues, your self-image. It'll run everything. It does now run everything. One of the troubles is people who don't plan their life are planning their life. If you're not planning a successful life, in whatever terms you measure success, if you're not planning a successful life, then you must have what else is there. But don't blame it on luck. There's a law of cause and effect. But there are other universal laws. There's a law governing matter. A law that gives steel the properties of steel. A law that makes iron rust when exposed to moist oxygen, or exposed to oxygen for that matter. There's a law that makes glass transparent and translucent, that doesn't allow you to see through brick. You wouldn't think of building a window out of brick, would you? Why not? Well, because the properties of brick don't allow you to see through it. So you understand the law and you make a better building. Unfortunately for us, innate intelligence is bound by the laws of the universe. Universal laws are immutable. They can't be changed. They're absolute and permanent. They even apply to universal intelligence. Even universal intelligence can't break universal law, can't set it aside. Can you imagine what chaos there would be in the universe if you plant corn and don't know what's coming up? Well, maybe God changed his mind this week. Universal intelligence must function within the framework of universal law, which means innate intelligence can only function within the framework of universal law. I don't care if you're the good guy or the bad guy, whether you go to church or you don't go to church, somebody cuts your head off, you're going to die. This is the law. You need a head in order to live. Innate intelligence would love to repair all your subluxations, but it can only function within universal law. And the law is that muscles, in order to correct subluxations, must have an adequate force applied at a place and in a direction that they can be converted. That's true whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. Vertebral subluxations will never be corrected without the use of force. Yeah, but didn't you say that the innate intelligence corrects subluxations all by itself? Yes, it uses available universal force. When you duck your head to get in the car, when you stand up, you watch your cat and dog in the morning when they get up and stretch every muscle through the spine? Well, they're using universal forces, some of them generated internally. You twist and turn, they say, an average of 32 times a night in your sleep. That's putting all kinds of forces into the spine, and those forces are being utilized to correct subluxation. But sometimes those readily available forces are not enough. Now we need something else. Now we need the chiropractor to cunningly devise a force so properly applied that even at its minimum, it is sufficient to be converted into an adjustment. But the innate intelligence can only function within the framework of universal law. And next week, we're going to talk quite a bit more about universal law and how it is not adapted by universal intelligence, but how by innate intelligence, but how innate intelligence adapts itself to universal law. Thank you.